Money can't buy happiness because miracle isn't in wealth, but in the unbreakable bond of love. This family's journey will leave you breathless. Jason William Brooks sat in the dimly lit room, his mind drifting back to a time when Daisy, his sweet little daughter, used to run freely across the sprawling lawn, her laughter ringing through the air as she chased their loyal dog. Her joy had been infectious, her small feet barely touching the grass as she twirled and skipped under the bright sun. But the sharp hum of medical machines pulled Jason back to the cold present, the haunting reality that now governed their lives. The Brooks mansion, once filled with warmth and life, now stood eerily silent. The stale scent of antiseptic filled the air, and the sterile environment mirrored the heavy burden on Jason's heart. Known for his ruthlessness in business, Jason was not easily rattled. Yet here, standing at the threshold of his daughter's room, he was nothing but a father overwhelmed with helplessness. Daisy, only 6 years old, lay motionless in her bed, surrounded by a fortress of medical equipment that beeped and whirred, keeping vigil over every fragile heartbeat. She had been battling a degenerative illness that had stripped her of the freedom she once knew, confining her to this room for months. The best doctor's money could buy had come and gone, offering nothing but grim prognosis. Their treatments had done little more than slow the inevitable march of her disease. "Mr. Brooks?" A soft voice broke through his thoughts. It was Hilary, the nurse on duty. "It's time for Daisy's medication." Jason gave a silent nod, stepping aside to allow Hilary to enter. He watched as she skillfully administered the medicines, her movements gentle and precise. She spoke to Daisy in a soothing voice, even though the girl couldn't respond. Her care was tender, and it was clear that Hilary's heart went beyond the duties of her job. When Hilary finished, Jason followed her out into the hallway. The weight of everything pressed down on him, exhaustion evident in his posture. "Hilary," he said, his voice low, tinged with fatigue, "I need you to be honest with me. How do you really see Daisy's condition?" Hilary hesitated, glancing at him with a look that spoke volumes before she even opened her mouth. "Mr. Brooks, Daisy is strong, a real fighter, but—" Jason's heart clenched. He knew where this was going, and he couldn't help but finish the sentence for her, his voice cracking. "But she needs more than medication and machines, doesn't she?" Hilary nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. She needs someone by her side constantly, someone who can talk to her, read to her, remind her that there's a world beyond these four walls." Her words hit Jason like a punch in the gut. He had been so focused on trying to save Daisy with science, with medicine, that he had overlooked the one thing she might need the most: human connection. But how could he give her that when his business empire demanded so much of him? The guilt gnawed at him, a relentless force that he couldn't shake. "I understand," he finally managed to say. "Thank you, Hilary. You can go now." That night, Jason couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned in his enormous king-sized bed, haunted by thoughts of Daisy, of his company, of Elena. His late wife had always been the heartbeat of the family, the one who effortlessly balanced work and home life. She would have known exactly what to do, but she was gone. The same car accident that had claimed her life had left Daisy in this bedridden state. By morning, Jason had made up his mind. He called his assistant and gave clear, direct orders. He needed to find someone who could devote their entire time and energy to caring for Daisy. Not just a nurse, but someone who could be with her around the clock, offering her the attention and care that he couldn't provide. The search began immediately. Over the next few days, a parade of highly qualified nurses, occupational therapists, and even a renowned healer, recommended by one of Jason's business partners, came through the mansion's doors. But none of them felt right. Some were too clinical, lacking the warmth Daisy needed. Others were too frivolous, seeming more concerned with their appearance than with caring for a sick child. Jason watched each of them come and go, growing more disheartened with every failed interview. Time was slipping away, and with it Daisy's chance at a life that went beyond the sterile confines of her illness. He knew he couldn't afford to give up, but finding the right person was proving more difficult than he had ever imagined. No one seemed to truly grasp what Daisy needed until Veronica stepped into the picture. Jason first laid eyes on her in the waiting area of his office, sitting stiffly in one of the plush leather chairs. She didn't belong in such a setting. Her clothes, while clean, were visibly worn. The roughness of her hands told the story of a life full of labor. "Ms. Veronica Mendoza?" the receptionist called out. Veronica stood up, nervously smoothing her skirt. As she entered Jason's office, he could see the resolve in her eyes, despite the clear signs of her unease. "Mr. Brooks," Veronica began, extending her hand, "thank you for seeing me." Jason shook her hand, noticing the strength behind her grip. "Please, have a seat," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his desk. "Tell me, why do you believe you're the right person to care for my daughter?" Veronica took a deep breath before replying. "Mr. Brooks, I don't have prestigious credentials or experience in renowned hospitals, but what I do have is a heart willing to love and care for your daughter as if she were my own. I've spent my life caring for children, including my younger brother who had cerebral palsy. I know what it's like to watch someone you love fight against their own body day after day. And I understand how vital it is to never lose hope." Jason listened in silence, studying her every gesture, every tone in her voice. There was something in Veronica, an authenticity that none of the other candidates had shown. "And what about your current situation?" Jason asked. "This job would require you to live here, at the estate. Are you prepared for that?" For a brief moment, Veronica's eyes welled up, but her voice remained steady. "Mr. Brooks, I have nothing holding me anywhere. My brother passed away 6 months ago. Since then, I've been searching for a purpose, a reason to keep going. I believe that caring for your daughter could be that purpose." A quiet moment settled over the room. Jason rose from his chair and walked to the window, turning his back to Veronica. When he finally turned around, his decision was clear. "You're hired," he said simply. "You can move in tomorrow. My assistant will provide you with all the details." Veronica blinked, caught off guard by how quickly the decision had been made. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. I won't let you down." "I hope not," Jason replied, his tone firm. "My daughter's life is in your hands." The following day, Veronica arrived at the Brooks estate with a small suitcase containing everything she owned. She was greeted by the housekeeper, who led her through a maze of hallways until they reached Daisy's room. Jason was standing by his daughter's bed, his expression unreadable. When Veronica entered, he turned as if to say something, but instead he merely nodded and left the room, leaving her alone with Daisy. Veronica approached the bed slowly. The little girl lay there, fragile and delicate, attached to tubes and machines. Veronica gently took the child's hand in hers. "Hello, Daisy," she whispered softly. "My name is Veronica. I've come here to take care of you, to keep you company. I know you don't know me yet, but I hope we can become friends." There was no reply, of course. But Veronica wasn't discouraged. She reached into her bag, pulled out a book, and began reading aloud. It was The Little Prince, her favorite childhood story. "Somewhere in the universe there's a planet where a little prince lives," she started, her voice filling the room with tales of roses, foxes, and laughing stars. And so began Veronica's new life at the Brooks mansion. Days and nights spent caring for Daisy, reading her stories, singing her songs, speaking of a world the girl couldn't see but one that Veronica painted with her words in vivid detail. From a distance, Jason watched, torn between his need to be near his daughter and the fear of facing the harsh reality of her condition. He saw how Veronica tended to Daisy, with a devotion that went far beyond mere duty. And though he would never admit it, a flicker of hope began to take root in his heart. Weeks passed, followed by months. A routine took hold in the mansion. Veronica spent every waking moment with Daisy, alternating between medical care and sensory stimulation. She read her books, described the weather outside, and even brought flowers from the garden so Daisy could smell them. One afternoon, while Veronica sang softly to Daisy, she noticed a faint twitch in the girl's fingers. She held her breath, afraid it was just her imagination. But then it happened again, a tiny spasm, barely visible, but unmistakably real. "Daisy!" Veronica gasped, her heart pounding. "If you can hear me, try moving your fingers again." Seconds dragged by, each one feeling like an eternity. Then, slowly, Daisy's fingers moved once more. Veronica couldn't hold back her tears of joy. She dashed to the door, shouting, "Mr. Brooks, come quickly! Daisy moved!" Jason arrived in an instant, his face a storm of hope and fear. "What happened?" "Her fingers, sir," Veronica explained, pointing to Daisy's hand. They moved. Twice. Jason rushed to the bedside, gently taking his daughter's hand into his own. "Daisy, sweetheart, can you hear me? If you can, move your fingers." Silence filled the room as they waited. And then, almost imperceptibly, Daisy's fingers twitched again. Jason let out a sob, clutching his daughter's hand to his chest. "My brave girl," he whispered through his tears. "My precious, brave girl." Veronica stood quietly, her own heart swelling with emotion. For the first time since she had come to the mansion, she saw Jason William Brooks not as the commanding millionaire, but as a father, desperate to reach his daughter. That night, after the doctors had examined Daisy and confirmed that she was indeed showing signs of neurological improvement, Jason asked Veronica to join him in his study. His voice filled with suppressed emotion. "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for Daisy, for us." Veronica shook her head. "You don't need to thank me, Mr. Brooks. Daisy is a wonderful child. Taking care of her is a privilege." Jason looked at her for a long moment, as if truly seeing her for the first time. "You know, when I hired you, I thought I was just getting someone to do a job. But you've brought life back into this house." Veronica felt her cheeks flush under the intensity of his gaze. "I'm just doing what I believe is right," she murmured. "And that's more than most people would do," Jason replied. There was a moment of silence, thick with something neither of them dared to name. Finally, Jason spoke again. I'd like to learn from you, to learn how to care for Daisy the way you do." His words surprised Veronica. This man, who had seemed so distant and cold at first, was now showing a vulnerability she never expected. "Of course," Veronica replied with a warm smile. "I'd be happy to teach you everything I know." And so, a new dynamic began in the Brooks mansion. Jason started spending more time in Daisy's room, watching and learning from Veronica. Slowly, he learned how to read stories with playful voices, sing lullabies, and describe the outside world in a way that Daisy could imagine. Veronica observed with a mixture of pride and something else, something she didn't dare to name. She watched as Jason transformed from a distant father to one fully dedicated to his daughter. She saw how his eyes softened when he looked at Daisy, how his voice changed when he spoke to her. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Daisy's condition slowly improved. She could now move not only her fingers, but also her head. Her eyes followed movements around the room, and though she still couldn't speak, her facial expressions began to show emotions. One afternoon, as Veronica and Jason sat beside Daisy's bed, reading a story together, something extraordinary happened. Daisy smiled. A small smile, barely noticeable, but unmistakable. That smile marked a turning point in the life of the Brooks mansion. It was as if a ray of sunlight had pierced through the thick clouds that had darkened their lives for so long. Inspired by Daisy's progress, Jason began to spend even more time with his daughter, delegating some of his business responsibilities to his subordinates. Veronica watched this transformation with joy and a deeper feeling she didn't dare name. She saw how Jason softened, how his laughter, once so rare, now filled the mansion's halls. And she couldn't help but feel a warmth in her chest every time he smiled at her, or when their hands accidentally touched while caring for Daisy together. One afternoon, while Daisy slept peacefully, Jason invited Veronica to have coffee in the garden. They sat on a wrought-iron bench, surrounded by the scent of roses. Jason spoke with a voice full of emotion. "Veronica," he said, looking into her eyes, "I don't know how to thank you for what you've done for us. You've brought light into our lives when everything seemed so dark." Veronica felt herself blush under his intense gaze. "You don't need to thank me, Jason. Daisy is a wonderful child, and you're an incredible father." There was a moment of silence, heavy with unspoken tension. Jason leaned slightly toward her, and for a moment Veronica thought he was going to kiss her. But just then, the intercom in his pocket buzzed, signaling that Daisy was waking up. The moment broke, and they both hurried back to Daisy's room. But something had shifted between them, a spark that couldn't be ignored. The following days were filled with a sweet tension. Stolen glances, accidental touches, shared smiles over Daisy's head. Veronica felt like a teenager again, her heart racing every time Jason entered the room. But happiness never comes without complications. One morning, while Veronica was giving Daisy her daily bath, she noticed something strange. The girl seemed to have a fever, and her breathing was more labored than usual. Alarmed, Veronica immediately called Jason and the family doctor. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. Doctors coming and going, machines beeping, Jason pacing nervously in the hallway. Finally, the doctor emerged from the room with a grave expression. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I'm afraid Daisy has developed an infection. We need to get her to the hospital immediately." The world seemed to freeze for Jason and Veronica. All the progress, all the hope of the past few months vanished in an instant. As the ambulance whisked Daisy away, Jason collapsed into Veronica's arms, his sobs echoing in the sudden stillness of the mansion. At the hospital, time crawled, each hour feeling like days. Jason and Veronica took turns by Daisy's side, speaking softly to her, singing, reminding her she wasn't alone. The doctors came and went, adjusting medications, running tests. One long, sleepless night, as Jason sat beside Daisy's bed with Veronica by his side, he finally broke. The tears flowed freely. "I can't lose her, Veronica," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I lost Elena. If I lose Daisy too, I don't know how I'll go on." Veronica squeezed his hand gently between hers. "You won't lose her, Jason. Daisy is strong. She's a fighter, and she has us. We're not giving up." Jason looked at her, his eyes glistening with tears. Without thinking, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was a desperate kiss, filled with fear and need, but also something deeper, something that had been growing between them for months. When they pulled apart, they both seemed startled by what had just happened. Before either of them could speak, a sound startled them. Daisy was stirring, her eyes slowly fluttering open. "Dad?" Daisy whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Veronica?" It was the first time Daisy had spoken since the accident. Jason and Veronica looked at each other, tears of joy welling in their eyes. In that moment, they knew that whatever the future held, they would face it together as a family. The days that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Daisy slowly improved, and every word she spoke felt like music to Jason and Veronica's ears. Yet the shadow of her condition hung over them like a dark cloud. Jason and Veronica hardly left her side, taking turns to rest on the uncomfortable hospital room sofa. The tension between them was palpable. The kiss they had shared lingered in the air like an unanswered question. One afternoon, while Daisy slept, Jason led Veronica to the hospital cafeteria. Sitting across from each other, coffee cups cooling between them, they finally addressed the unspoken. "Veronica," Jason began, his voice low and filled with emotion, "about what happened the other night." Veronica gently interrupted him. "Jason, you don't need to explain. I understand it was a moment of vulnerability, of fear." "No," Jason said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "It wasn't just that. Veronica, since you came into our lives, everything has changed. Not just for Daisy, but for me too. You've brought light into our darkness." Veronica's heart raced. "Jason, Before she could finish, Jason's pager buzzed urgently. It was from Daisy's room. Panic gripped them as they rushed back. When they arrived, they found Daisy awake, her wide eyes filled with fear. "Dad," she said, her voice trembling, "I can't move my legs." The world seemed to stop. The doctors arrived within minutes, running tests and exams. Jason and Veronica waited outside, clinging to each other, the palpable fear between them. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor came out, his expression grim. "Mr. Brooks," he said, "I'm afraid the infection has caused inflammation in Daisy's spinal cord. At this point, we cannot determine if the paralysis is temporary or permanent." Jason felt the ground open up beneath him. Veronica held him, her own voice trembling as she asked, "What can we do?" "For now, we continue the treatment for the infection and begin intensive physical therapy," the doctor replied. "Time will tell if Daisy will regain mobility." That night, after Daisy finally fell asleep, exhausted from fear and all the tests, Jason and Veronica sat in silence in the hospital hallway. The weight of the situation pressed down on them like a heavy stone. "I can't do this alone," Jason whispered, his voice breaking. "Veronica, I need you. We need you to stay with us, not just as Daisy's nurse, but as part of our family." Veronica looked at him, her eyes full of tears and determination. "I'm not going anywhere, Jason. We're in this together, no matter what happens." They embraced there in the hospital hallway, two souls bound by their love for a little girl and a growing connection between them. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Hospital life became a new normal for Daisy, Jason, and Veronica. Daisy's room transformed into a small home, filled with drawings, books, and toys. Jason had arranged for a more comfortable pull-out bed, knowing none of them would be going home while Daisy was still there. Physical therapy became the center of their days. Daisy, with a determination that even surprised the doctors, threw herself into each session with all her heart. Jason and Veronica were there every step of the way, cheering her on, wiping away her tears of frustration and celebrating every small victory. It was during one of these therapy sessions that the miracle happened. Daisy was on the parallel bars, struggling to take a step, when suddenly her right foot moved slightly forward. "I did it!" Daisy shouted, her eyes shining with excitement. "Dad! Veronica! Look!" Jason and Veronica rushed to her side, tears streaming down their faces. The physical therapist, equally moved, began running additional tests. "This is incredible," the doctor said when he arrived to examine Daisy. "The inflammation is decreasing faster than we expected. With hard work, Daisy may regain much of her mobility." The news was like a ray of sunshine after a long storm. That night, after Daisy fell asleep, exhausted but happy, Jason and Veronica sat on the small balcony outside her hospital room. "I can't believe it," Jason said, his voice full of awe. "A few months ago, I thought I'd lost her, and now—" Veronica took his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Daisy's a fighter, just like her father." Jason looked at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I couldn't have done this without you, Veronica. You've saved us both." They stared at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Slowly, Jason leaned in, their lips meeting in a soft, tender kiss, so different from the desperate kiss they had shared weeks before. When they pulled apart, Veronica had tears in her eyes. "Jason, I'm scared." "Of what?" he asked gently. "Of this. Of us. You've been my boss for so long. What if I'm confusing gratitude with love? What if Daisy doesn't approve?" Jason cupped her face in his hands. "Veronica, what I feel for you goes beyond gratitude. You've become an essential part of our lives. And Daisy adores you. We're a family now." Veronica smiled through her tears. "A family," Jason repeated, savoring the word. That night marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. As Daisy continued to recover, Jason and Veronica carefully navigated their blossoming relationship. They shared small moments of intimacy, hands intertwined as they walked through hospital corridors, stolen kisses in the elevator, meaningful glances over Daisy's head. But not everything was easy. Daisy's recovery was long and grueling. There were days of frustration, tears, and setbacks. During those moments, Jason and Veronica leaned on each other, drawing strength from their bond. It was during one of these difficult times that Daisy surprised them. After an especially exhausting physical therapy session, the little girl looked at them with a seriousness beyond her years. "Dad, Veronica," she said softly, "do you love each other?" Jason and Veronica exchanged startled glances. "It's okay if you do," Daisy interrupted before they could respond. "I just want you to be happy, and I'd love it if Veronica became my mum." Her words left them breathless. Veronica felt her eyes fill with tears, and Jason held her tightly. "Oh, Daisy," Veronica said, her voice trembling with emotion. "I already love you as if you were my own daughter." That night, while Daisy slept peacefully, Jason led Veronica to the hospital garden. Under a starry sky, he knelt before her. "Veronica Mendoza," he began, pulling a small box from his pocket, "will you do me the honor of becoming my wife and Daisy's mother?" Veronica, tears of joy streaming down her cheeks, could only nod before throwing herself into his arms. As they kissed beneath the stars, they both knew this was only the beginning of their story. The road ahead would not be easy, but they would walk it together, as a family. News of Jason and Veronica's engagement quickly spread throughout the hospital. Nurses smiled knowingly when they saw them, and doctors offered their congratulations, but not everyone was pleased with the news. One morning, While Veronica was helping Daisy with her exercises, Jason received a phone call that left him visibly shaken. When he hung up, his face was pale. "What's wrong?" Veronica asked, concerned. Jason let out a heavy sigh. "It was my mother. She found out about our engagement and she's not happy. She's coming here." Veronica felt her heart sink. She had heard of Callista Green, the Brooks family matriarch, known for her strong character and high standards. "What are we going to do?" she asked nervously. "We'll face her together," Jason replied, taking her hand. "We're a family now, and nothing will change that." Callista Green arrived at the hospital that very afternoon, her imposing presence filling Daisy's room. She eyed Veronica from head to toe with barely concealed disdain. "So, you're the nurse who's bewitched my son," she said coldly. Veronica stood tall, refusing to be intimidated. "Ma'am, I understand this might be a shock to you, but I assure you, my feelings for Jason and Daisy are genuine." Callista Green let out a dry laugh. "Of course they are. Who wouldn't have genuine feelings for a millionaire and his heiress?" "Mother?" Jason interjected, his voice thick with indignation. "I won't allow you to speak of Veronica like that. She's been a blessing to this family." The tension in the room was palpable. Daisy, who had been quietly watching, suddenly spoke up. "Grandma," she said firmly, "Veronica saved me. She takes care of me, makes me laugh, and she loves Dad. Isn't that what matters?" Daisy's words seemed to have an effect on Callista Green. Her expression softened slightly as she looked at her granddaughter. "Daisy, sweetheart," she said, approaching the bed, "I only want what's best for you and your father." "And Veronica is what's best for us," Daisy responded, with a wisdom far beyond her years. Callista Green glanced at Veronica, then at Jason, and finally back at Daisy. Something in her expression shifted, as if she was seeing the situation in a new light. "Very well," she said at last. "It seems I've judged too quickly. Veronica, I'd like to get to know you better. Perhaps we could have coffee sometime?" Veronica nodded, surprised by the sudden change in tone. "I'd love that, ma'am," she replied warmly. As Callista Green and Veronica left the room, Jason and Daisy exchanged a glance of relief and hope. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. With Callista Green reluctant yet sincere blessing, the preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Jason insisted on a grand ceremony, fitting for the society to which he belonged, but Veronica preferred something more intimate. "We don't need a big celebration," Veronica would argue. "What matters is that we're together with Daisy and those we love." Eventually they reached a compromise, a small ceremony in the hospital chapel, followed by a larger reception at the Brooks mansion. Meanwhile, Daisy continued to make progress in her recovery. Each day she regained a little more movement in her legs, and her determination never wavered. Veronica and Jason were by her side every step of the way, literally, encouraging and supporting her. The night before the wedding, while Daisy slept and Jason finalized some last-minute details, Veronica found herself alone in the hospital garden. Gazing up at the stars, she couldn't help but reflect on how much her life had changed in such a short time. "Are you all right?" Jason's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She turned to see him, her heart swelling with love. "Better than all right," she replied with a smile. "I was just thinking about how lucky I am." Jason wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "We're the lucky ones, Veronica. You saved Daisy and me. You gave us hope when we needed it most." They stayed like that for a moment, basking in the peace of the night and the warmth of their love. Tomorrow their lives would change forever, but for now, everything was perfect. Little did they know, however, that fate had one more surprise in store for them, one that would test their love and strength like never before. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, as if the sky itself wanted to celebrate Jason and Veronica's union. The hospital chapel was adorned with simple yet elegant white flowers, and a small group of close family and friends gathered to witness the ceremony. Veronica, wearing a simple white dress, walked down the aisle on her older brother's arm. Her eyes sparkled with emotion as she saw Jason waiting for her at the altar, with Daisy by his side in her wheelchair, beaming with joy. The ceremony was brief, but deeply moving. When the moment came, Jason spoke his vows with heartfelt sincerity. "In the darkest moment, you brought light with you. You taught me how to be a better father, a better man. I promise to love and honor you every day of my life and to raise our family with the same love and dedication you've shown us." Veronica, her eyes filled with tears, responded, "Jason, you and Daisy gave me a purpose when I needed it most. You showed me that love can bloom even in the hardest of circumstances. I promise to always stand by your side, through the good and the bad, and to love Daisy as if she were my own daughter." When the priest declared them husband and wife, the chapel erupted in applause. Daisy was the first to hug the couple, her eyes shining with happiness. The reception at the Brooks mansion was an elegant yet intimate affair. Friends and family gathered to celebrate Jason and Veronica's love and the miracle of Daisy's recovery. The young girl, determined to surprise everyone, had been practicing in secret with her physical therapist. In the middle of the celebration, with the help of a walker, she took her first public steps toward her parents. Not a single eye in the room remained dry as Daisy slowly made her way toward Jason and Veronica. When she reached them, the three of them embraced, symbolizing the unity of their new family. However, the joy of that perfect moment was about to be interrupted. As Veronica danced with Jason, she suddenly felt dizzy and weak. Before she could say anything, she fainted in her husband's arms. Panic took over the party. Jason, his face pale with worry, carried Veronica to the car, while Daisy followed in her wheelchair, her eyes filled with fear. At the hospital, doctors rushed to attend to Veronica, leaving Jason and Daisy in agonizing anticipation. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor emerged with a serious expression on his face. "Mr. Brooks," he began, "your wife is stable now, but—" "But what?" Jason asked, his voice tight with anxiety. The doctor took a deep breath before continuing. "We've detected a mass in her brain. We need to run more tests, but it's possible that it's a tumor." Jason's world seemed to stop. He barely registered the doctor's words about further tests and potential treatments. All he could think of was Veronica, and the cruel irony of fate that had given them so much happiness, only to now threaten to take it all away. Sensing her father's distress, Daisy gently took his hand. "Dad," she said softly, "Veronica is strong. She helped us through tough times. Now, it's our turn to help her." Jason looked at his daughter, surprised by her maturity and strength. He nodded, finding comfort in Daisy's words. In the days that followed, Veronica underwent a series of tests and examinations. Jason and Daisy stayed by her side, offering unwavering support and love. The determination they had once admired in Veronica now reflected in them. Finally, after a week of agonizing waiting, the neurologist called them into his office to discuss the results. "The tumor is operable," the doctor explained, "but the surgery comes with significant risks. There is a possibility of permanent neurological damage. Veronica sitting between Jason and Daisy, took a deep breath before speaking. "What are my options?" The doctor continued to outline the possible treatments ranging from surgery to radiation and chemotherapy. Each option came with its own risks and benefits. As they listened, Jason squeezed Veronica's hand, his eyes conveying all the emotions words couldn't express. Daisy, too, kept a hand on Veronica's knee, a constant reminder of the love and support surrounding her. At the end of the consultation, the doctor left them alone to discuss their options. The silence in the room was heavy, laden with fear and uncertainty. Finally, Veronica spoke, her voice soft but resolute. "I'm going to fight," she said, looking at Jason and Daisy. "For you, for our family. No matter how hard it gets, we'll get through this together." Jason hugged her tightly, tears streaming freely down his face. "We'll be with you every step of the way," he promised. Daisy joined the embrace, forming a circle of love and support around Veronica. "We're a family," Daisy said firmly, "and families stick together no matter what." As they held each other, Veronica felt a mix of fear and hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and obstacles, but with the love of her family by her side, she knew she had the strength to face whatever came next. Veronica's battle was just beginning, but at that moment, surrounded by Jason and Daisy's love, she felt stronger than ever. Together, they would face this new fight, one day at a time, with the same determination and love that had brought them together in the first place. The following months were an emotional roller coaster for the Brooks family. Veronica chose to undergo surgery, followed by an intense regimen of radiation and chemotherapy. Each day brought new challenges, but also small victories that they celebrated together. Jason completely reorganized his life to be by Veronica's side every step of the way. He delegated much of his business responsibilities, prioritizing the care of his wife and daughter. Daisy, for her part, became a constant source of joy and motivation, her own recovery inspiring Veronica during her most difficult moments. During the long nights at the hospital, when pain and fear threatened to overwhelm her, Veronica found comfort in the stories she used to read to Daisy. Now it was Daisy who read to her, her soft voice filling the room with tales of hope and courage. One day, as Veronica rested after a particularly grueling chemotherapy session, Daisy entered the room with a mysterious smile. "Mama," she said, using that word for the first time to refer to Veronica, "I have a surprise for you." With Jason's help, Daisy stood beside Veronica's bed. Then, to her adoptive mother's astonished eyes, she took several unassisted steps, reaching Veronica to hug her tightly. "My brave girl," Veronica whispered through her tears. Jason joined the embrace, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude. In that moment, despite all the hardships, they truly felt blessed. Veronica's treatment continued for months, each day a battle against exhaustion and the side effects, but with every challenge overcome, her determination only grew stronger. The strength she had once admired in Daisy, she now found in herself. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the day of the last MRI arrived. The family waited with bated breath as the doctor reviewed the results. When he entered the room, his face unreadable, the air seemed to freeze. "Mrs. Brooks," he began, and for a terrible moment the world seemed to stop. Then a smile slowly spread across his face. "The tumor is completely gone. You're cancer-free." The room erupted in cheers and tears of joy. Jason hugged Veronica so tightly he almost lifted her off the bed. Daisy jumped up and down, her laughter blending with her happy tears. In the days that followed, as Veronica prepared to leave the hospital for the last time, she reflected on the incredible journey her life had taken over the past few years. She had come to the Brooks mansion as a simple nurse, searching for purpose. Now, she was leaving as a wife, a mother, and a survivor. The day Veronica finally returned home, the mansion was decorated with flowers and balloons. Friends, family, and hospital staff gathered to celebrate not only her recovery, but also Daisy's, who could now walk with the aid of a cane. That night, after all the guests had left, the Brooks family sat in the garden, enjoying the stillness of the starry night. "You know," Veronica said, her voice soft but filled with emotion, "when I first came here, I thought I was coming to take care of Daisy. But the truth is, you both saved me." Jason took her hand, kissing it gently. "We saved each other, my love. You showed us the true meaning of strength and love." Daisy, nestled between her parents, added, "We're a family, and families take care of each other." As they gazed up at the stars, Veronica thought about how far they had come, from despair to hope, from fear to love. Their journey had not been easy, but every trial had made them stronger, more united. "What do we do now?" Daisy asked, her voice full of innocent curiosity. Jason and Veronica exchanged a knowing glance before Veronica replied, "Now, my love, we live. We cherish every moment, love with all our hearts, and we never, ever take for granted the blessing of having one another." And so, under the starry sky, the Brooks family began the next chapter of their life, a chapter filled with love, hope, and the certainty that whatever the future held, they would face it together. Because in the end, they had learned the most important lesson of all, that the true miracle wasn't in wealth or even physical healing, but in the transformative power of love and compassion. A power that had turned a nurse, a millionaire, and a sick little girl into a united, unbreakable family. As the night wore on, and the last traces of their past trials faded away, Jason, Veronica, and Daisy embraced, their hearts beating in harmony, grateful for the most precious gift of all, the love of a true family. And that's where our story ends for today, my friends. But before we part ways, I need just one thing from you. If this story moved you, inspired you, or simply entertained you, please take a second to hit that like button. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below and tell us what part of the story touched you the most. Your feedback means everything to us. We'll be back tomorrow with yet another tale that'll capture your heart and imagination. Until then, keep living, keep loving, and keep making a difference one moment at a time. See you soon.